Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Indaba Africa. This is Chris on the Chris Wyatt Africa channel. Today's topic is a strange situation unfolding in Southern Africa between Botswana and South Africa and involves Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe, who has been entangled in a purported scandal which involves 150 billion rand, or about 10 billion US dollars, that was purportedly stolen from the government of Botswana to, if you think that's not strange enough, to purportedly support a coup d'etat in 2019 against the sitting president, Eric Masisi. Masisi rose to the top of the Botswana Democratic Party and became president when his predecessor, who handpicked him, Ian Khama, stepped down as president and Masisi took over, and then Masisi won the election. So this very strange case, which has been unfolding since at least September of 2019, is quite odd. Now, the reason about the story today is because the Daily Maverick ran a story talking about lawyers in Botswana who were upset about the government hiring AfriForum and its attorney, Jerry Nell, to represent their interest in South Africa. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and some challenges with the article itself. While I don't challenge the factual information that's included in this article, the tone and tenor of it is misleading in a few respects, whether it's intentional or something that simply the journalist and the newspaper are unaware of. Nonetheless, these things need to be pointed out. For starters, the title, Botswana Lawyers Decry Involvement of AfriForum in Bridgette Motsepe Case, is problematic. It says lawyers. Yet the journalist cites a single lawyer in Botswana. Now, to be fair, that lawyer is Mboki Chilisa, who is the vice chairperson of the Botswana Law Society. But at no time in the article does the journalist or Chilisa ever claim that Chilisa speaks for other attorneys or for the Botswana Law Society. Chilisa speaks solely for Chilisa. And here are a few comments that were quoted in the article. So Chilisa says, "We are all extremely disappointed by the appointment of AfriForum, given what AfriForum stands for. It's not something we expected or thought government could do. It is a group which seeks to stand in opposition to transformation and a group that seeks to stand in the way of trying to redress inequalities of the past in South Africa." Now, that's a very serious charge, a blatantly false charge, by the way, but a serious charge by a Botswana-based attorney against a civil rights organization in South Africa. That in itself doesn't draw your attention. However, Mr. Chilisa's Facebook post will very much get your attention. He continues, "The timing is very bizarre. At the moment, there is a global wave that seeks to uproot racism the world over. And in this sensitive and delicate time, you decide to engage AfriForum? That's very alarming." How so? And why is it alarming? Now, Mr. Chilisa made the following comments on his Facebook page just in the past day. He mentioned that AfriForum was not the right choice, and he was challenged by another person, Debbie Benjamin, who challenged his assertion. He said that AfriForum can force the South African government to respond. We can't from here. Our lawyers always engage these old white men. What's the fuss about? In response, Chilisa says, "I suppose you have got no difficulties in services being procured from pedophiles, rapists, white supremacists, and mass murderers as long as they are competent." The thread continues, and at the bottom of the thread, he wraps up in responding to Mr. Benjamin by saying, "Okay, then there's nothing wrong with my analogy above. It is okay to engage rapists to catch other rapists, murderers to catch other murderers." The shockingly biased, slanderous comments coming from a person who's the vice chairperson of the Botswana Law Society is disturbing in and of itself. This sort of racialization is part of society in South Africa, but it's not part of Botswana. Botswana are not racially charged in the manner that this person behaves. It's unfortunate. So which lawyers is the Daily Maverick talking about? Botswana Law Society and its members? Or that's who they're speaking for? Is Mr. Chilisa claiming to speak for them? It's not mentioned in the article. So that in itself is very difficult. Very difficult. Now, for her part, Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe obliquely attacked AfriForum's lawyer, who now is in the employ of the governor of Botswana to represent their interest in this case. Now, why did the government of Botswana seek a lawyer in South Africa to represent their interest in this case that was brought in South Africa? Well, In September of 2019, the government of Botswana contacted South Africa's government and asked for them to pursue this case. It has now been many months since that's taken place, approaching nearly a year with virtually no action. As a consequence, Gaborone was concerned that the case wouldn't be pursued. Now, never mind the merits of the case. That's something we can talk about, and it seems quite outlandish on its surface that this is actually a case, and I'll explain why. But nonetheless, it is a case, and the government of South Africa has drug its feet, so the government of Botswana has hired Jerry Nel through AfriForum to represent his interests. Now, he's famously known as a very tenacious advocate, known as the Bulldog, and former head of the National Prosecuting Authority. He's also the gentleman who tried the Jackie Selebi case, the disgraced, tarnished former head of international police, Interpol, and the South African Police Service, who wound up dying his dying days in prison, Jackie Selebi. He's also the attorney who was responsible for prosecuting Oscar Pistorius in the famous case to get justice for Reeva Steenkamp. Now, when I say Motsepe-Radebe attacks him obliquely, she rolls back in a defensive position of raising the issue of gender and his accomplishments in order to distract from what's really happening here. And this is what she says. She says, an emotional Motsepe on Thursday preferred not to dwell on the racial dynamics. What racial dynamics? There are no racial dynamics here. Another shortcoming in this article by the Daily Maverick. This is not about race. It's being made about race by Mboki Chilisa and the Daily Maverick. But she preferred not to dwell on the racial dynamics, but said Nel should, quote, not allow any country or any government to destroy what he did for Reeva. He did a good job for a woman and stood by her. And of course, she's referring to Reeva Steenkamp, who was murdered by Oscar Pistorius, her boyfriend, in a domestic violence situation. Why? What's the purpose of that? Other than to obliquely attack the attorney by implying that his reputation could be tarnished by backing the government of Botswana. Now, what's going on with the government of Botswana here? This is a strange situation. For their part, the journalists did ask AfriForum why they were involved in this case. And AfriForum's CEO, Kali Creel, gave a statement and said it was a privilege to work with the government of Botswana. It is necessary for us fellow Africans who want to help ensure that our continent is successful to do everything in our power to eradicate fraud and money laundering, he said on Wednesday. Our continent and subcontinent have immense potential that is being handicapped by a corrupt elite. Well, it's hard to argue with that. That certainly is the case in many locations around the continent and has been the case for decades. So it's good to see folks trying to stand up and stop this sort of thing. Now, on the surface, this is a really strange case. And in her defense, Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe does make the point that if, in fact, she was involved in a case that led to the theft of $10 billion from the fiscus of Botswana, that it would likely have caught the attention of somebody in power. I would have to agree with her. Never mind the fact that these strange charge that this, in the article once again drags in other actors who are mentioned in the case, including former President Ian Khama and his former Chief of Intelligence Services, Isaac Kossi, as well as Walamenya Masawabi, dragging these three names. But the two key names that are brought into this to add to the story are Khama and Kossi. The allegations that Khama would be behind a coup d'etat against his handpicked successor over the juvenile tiff that's taking place between Masisi and Khama beggars the imagination. To what end? What exactly is Ian Khama going to get from this? It's a strange thing. So that alone makes it very strange. But nonetheless, there is a case in South Africa brought because money was taken from Absa and Nedbank and deposited in accounts. That money exists. There's a real case there. Whether Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe is involved or not is a whole other story. Now, she's angry because Botswana had the temerity to take the unresponsive African National Congress government to court over this case, which has been delayed and nothing has been happening. Why should that matter? Well, it matters because this woman is deeply tied to her success, her wealth, her ties are deeply tied to the government of South Africa. For instance, in South Africa, her sister is married to President Cyril Ramaphosa. And of course, she's married to a former minister and investor, Jeff Radebe, who's very closely tied to the ANC elites and very influential. Now, she's in the process, according to the article, of being separated and eventually divorced from Radebe, but nonetheless is still married to him at this point. Her wealth, her privilege, her influence, her position are not tied to her acumen. They're tied to her elite ties to ANC cadres. And so it is a germane point here. But as I said, and as she points out in her own defense, the amount of money is simply staggering. And if that kind of money had disappeared from the government of Botswana, someone would have noticed that. It can't simply just be taken away. So what are my issues here? I mean, the Daily Maverick is just reporting a news story. Yes, that's true. But here's the problems with this. First, Botswana lawyers. Just one lawyer is cited in this news article. And I mentioned that gentleman. A gentleman who posts slanderous, bigoted, very biased comments on social media, making the most vile accusations against the civil rights group unsubstantiated. In South Africa, that would find him in the docket, making such claims and laying such slander against AfriForum with no basis, no evidence whatsoever. And it's disturbing to see this sort of thing come from an attorney. But an attorney who is the vice chairperson of the Botswana Law Society, that is deeply disturbing. The next question is, did the journalist Karen du Plessis bother to check her source? These comments are freely available on Facebook. It took me all of about 15 seconds to find these things and less than a minute to read the shameful comments that this attorney posted. Yet that's the source for this story. That in itself beggars imagination. And why throughout the story does the journalist refer to Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe as Bridgette Motsepe when her name includes Radebe? That was her choice. That's the legal name she's been using for ages. Why was that dropped? Well, clearly, one can surmise that what is happening here is an effort to protect the African National Congress from not being embroiled in a scandal. Now, whether it's a legitimate scandal or not, we shall see. Nonetheless, it is a scandal. And this is top cover for ANC politicians, something the media in South Africa are very accustomed to doing and very talented at doing. Throughout the article, it seems as if the journalist, in many respects, is Bridgette's advocate, speaking for her, saying that she goes to great lengths to protect her, to clear her name. Motsepe has gone to great lengths in an effort to clear her name, in addition to Cherie Blair's Omnia strategy. Look at that name dropping right there. Tony Blair's wife? Yeah, Cherie Blair. She also employed international business intelligence agency Alico Limited to do an independent investigation into the allegations against her. That's very interesting. Where's the follow-up? Did you talk to Cherie Blair's Omnia? And did you talk to this investigative agency to find out what they may or may not know, if they could help prove the innocence of Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe? It's a decent story, ladies and gentlemen. But as I mentioned, it's misleading. The title itself is misleading. It gives the impression that lawyers are up in arms in Botswana about the government hiring an attorney in South Africa. This is not an uncommon occurrence. Oftentimes, in a civil case, countries will seek to hire an attorney who is accredited and licensed and approved on a bar in a different country, rather than take this international route, country to country. This is not an international court of justice case. This is not a case between South Africa and Botswana. This is a case against citizens in South Africa for purportedly committing crimes and taking money from Botswana and laundering it through South Africa. So Bridgette also raises the issue of this topic being very strange, that Botswana actually hired AfriForum. She says, if you're one government and you have a problem with another government, you try to interact with the ministers of foreign affairs and ambassadors. Well, Botswana has done that. DIRCO, the foreign ministry in South Africa, has been unresponsive to Botswana's request. The National Prosecuting Authority in South Africa has not pursued the case. And if they have, they haven't informed the government of Botswana. What recourse does the government of Botswana have? Now, I don't agree that the government of Botswana has a case. I don't have enough of the facts, but just on the surface, it seems like a highly incredulous claim. I don't doubt that money has been stolen, but 150 billion rand from the government itself? That's strange. And more bizarre is the purported coup attempt. That seems a very odd situation and seems highly unlikely and simply an effort, in my view, to tarnish and damage the name and reputation of Ian Khama, Masisi's predecessor. Nonetheless, She suggests that instead of taking this route, what Botswana could have done is they could have gone through regional bodies like the Southern African Development Community or the African Union. And to this, I can only laugh. It's absolutely comical. Folks have taken cases to the SADC tribunal and won judgments. And what happens? Absolutely nothing. So where's the value in going to SADC? There's no value. Even if the tribunal decides in your favor, you get no outcome from it. Just ask commercial farmers in Zimbabwe who filed a lawsuit. Mike Campbell, nearly beaten to death. An elderly man in his 70s, nearly beaten to death by thugs in Zimbabwe, sued Robert Gabriel Mugabe and the ZANU-PF government in the SADC tribunal and won the case. Won the case. Never received his property back. Mugabe simply blew it off. Are we to believe that if the government of Botswana took this case to the SADC tribunal, they reviewed it, they tried it, and they found in Botswana's favor, which I don't think is probably the outcome, but let's say they found in the favor of Gaborone. Do we really think that Pretoria would hand over Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe, whose sister is married to Cyril Ramaphosa? No. SADC tribunal. This is smoke and mirrors. And this undermines Bridgette's credibility. She has a valid point about how much money it is and how it seems implausible that she would be involved in that much money being stolen, nobody noticing it. And then my point about the plot seeming to be something implausible, but she continually undermines her position by raising oblique attacks against Jerry Nell, saying that, well, he shouldn't ruin his reputation because of the great things he did for Riva. And then also this part here about taking to the SADC tribunal. She knows full well that it's just a talking coffee house. It's nothing more, and nothing will come of it. And beyond that, the African Union, what mechanism does the African Union have to adjudicate this civil case? It doesn't. It doesn't have sovereignty over any of the actors involved. So that's just a joke. How are we to take people like this seriously? People tied to politicians who don't even understand the law, don't even understand the rules of their own country. It's smoke and mirrors. Most disturbing about this entire thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Daily Maverick, which does some pretty good investigative journalism, in my view, although some disagree with that, runs this story with such obvious problems, including right there in the title, Botswana lawyers. Anyway, there you have it. So I hope that you found this interesting, this discussion about what's happening in this bizarre and strange case purportedly involving Bridgette Motsepe-Radebe. If you've enjoyed the video and you're not a subscriber, I ask you to subscribe to the channel by smashing that subscription button right down there. And be sure to toggle that little bell icon. That'll get you notified of updates of my prepared videos like this, my Stray Voltage live streams, and my weekly program on Saturdays in which I interview someone from around the continent. Feel free to leave comments. I try to read all comments, and where appropriate, I'll respond. And finally, I ask that you smash that like button right down there, because likes drive viewership. And we've just crossed 4,000 subscribers on Chris White Africa. Very exciting development for us here. We thank you for your patronage and wish you a very pleasant day.